Pay for my wedding, it's your duty, or disappear forever. That's what my son screamed across the table. The venue, already booked under my name with a forged signature. He and his fiancée were planning to put him on the deed to my house. So I stood up and said, calm as ever, you have 24 hours to leave. Because if I didn't act, then I'd lose the home I built and myself with it. This is last goodbye. Today's story is about a mother whose son demanded she fund his wedding or disappear, and how she found the strength to protect her home, her savings, and herself. I have changed the characters' names to protect their privacy. What would you do if someone you love pushed you this far? Let me know in the comments. I always read them. Sunday evening. The roast was still warm on the table when Cass slammed his palm down beside his plate, rattling the silverware. Pay for my wedding, he shouted. It's your duty, or disappear forever. Maris didn't flinch. She sat beside him with one manicured hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes fixed on me like I was a contract with poor terms. In front of them lay a crisp spreadsheet, color-coded, bullet-pointed listing venue, catering photographer honeymoon suite. Each line item ended with my name, Mom. Payment pending. I looked down at my plate. Half a piece of squash still balanced on the fork, untouched. The smell of sage hung thick in the air. I should have felt anger, but instead, I felt the same numbness I used to feel working double shifts in the records department back when Cass was 12 and I couldn't afford a sitter. He kept going. You weren't around, Mom. You worked through everything. You owe me one good start. And then Rhett's voice crackled through the speakerphone at the end of the table, my ex-husband, now a ghost on the line. She's had that house for years. The savings, too. What else is it for if not to help your own child? My heart pounded. But it wasn't grief this time. It wasn't fear either. It was something cold, almost clean, a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. They were sitting at my table in my home, speaking as though my life's work had always belonged to them, as if I was the last barrier to their comfort. Cass leaned back, arms folded, waiting. Maris blinked slowly. Even the house was quiet, like it knew what was coming. I stood. The chair legs scraped against the floor. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. You have 24 hours to leave my house. Cass laughed, a short, sharp burst of disbelief. Maris's mouth tightened. Rhett was silent on the line. I didn't explain. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself. I turned, walked out of the dining room, and closed the door behind me. The air on the other side was still, but not peaceful. Not yet. It was waiting. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it. The house was no longer quiet, at least not in the way that meant peace. The walls trembled with low voices and hurried footsteps. Cass's pacing sent creaks up the hallway floorboards. Maris was hissing into her phone behind the guest room door. Rhett had already called back 3 times. I didn't answer. Inside my room, it was still. The kind of stillness that wraps tight like a held breath. I crossed to the desk and opened my laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard before typing the first search, long-term guest eviction, North Carolina. Then adult child no lease. Parent rights. Each result that confirmed what I already suspected slowed the thudding in my chest. No lease. No rental agreement. No claim. I clicked through legal forums and housing resources while snippets of memory flickered. Cass, dragging his duffel through the front door. His voice light. Just for a month or two. Mom. The guest room filling with his clutter before the week was out. The first time he corrected me in front of Maris, calling the living room our space. I had laughed. I don't know why. And then Maris, months later, walking slow circles through the dining room with a practiced smile saying, "This would photograph really well if we did soft florals here." They weren't waiting for my offer. They were waiting for my signature. I pulled a legal pad from the drawer and wrote locksmith in all caps. Then below it, call bank, talk to attorney, move title documents, copy IDs. My handwriting slanted smaller as the list grew, but my hand didn't shake. Outside, the voices grew louder. "She's heartless," Cass shouted. "Over one dinner she always folds," Maris said under her breath. "Just wait her out." Then Rhett again, his voice distorted, but familiar, telling Cass to push harder. "She's always been soft, son. Just press. She'll cave." I shut the laptop. The glow from the screen faded. I didn't cry. I didn't argue through the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed and repeated one sentence until it became a promise I believed. "You have 24 hours to leave." The hum of the house continued outside my door as I reached for the light and clicked it off. It started with a box on the rug. One cardboard box dropped with a thud just inside the front door. Cass stood over it with his old leather duffel slung across his shoulder. Cheeks, flushed eyes darting past mine like he'd already moved in. "Just a place to reset," he said. "Couple weeks tops." I nodded. I didn't ask too many questions. I never did with him. That night, I stripped the guest bed, ran a load of sheets, tucked an extra blanket at the foot. He said thanks already, scrolling through his phone, half listening, as I pointed out the drawer space. Within a week, the room was full. Sneakers wedged under the bed. T-shirts and dress shirts layered over the desk chair. Game console cords coiled like vines across the floor. Laundry migrated into the hallway. My bathroom smelled faintly of his body spray. He asked to borrow my car for an interview, said he'd only be gone an hour. He returned 5 hours later with the tank low and a cold bag of fast food in the passenger seat. When I gently mentioned gas money, he shrugged. "You make more than I do. You're fine." I didn't reply. I just took the keys, tossed the wrappers, and checked the odometer. Not long after, Rhett resurfaced his voice on speaker while Cass made scrambled eggs in my skillet. He told Cass he was too talented to waste time on dead-end jobs, and that my house, my fully paid-off home, was basically security for both of you. Cass laughed and called it our asset. He meant it half as a joke, I think. Gradually, the house lost its shape. His shoes blocked the door. His headphones lived on the kitchen table. He played streaming shows at full volume while I paid bills with a calculator in the bedroom. When I asked about a move-out date, he frowned like I'd failed some invisible loyalty test. I need support, not a countdown. I stopped setting the table. Ate dinner at the corner of the counter where I didn't have to look at his things. Sometimes I'd open my banking app, stare at the savings I'd tucked away for a smaller place someday. Quiet, clean. Just mine. Then one evening, Cass mentioned he'd met someone. Maris. "We're serious," he said, smiling into his phone. "Once we're settled, this place is going to be perfect for everything." I smiled back. But something inside me folded sharp and silent, just beneath the ribs. Maris stepped into the living room like she was appraising it. Her eyes moved from the tall ceilings to the framed certificates on the wall. My certifications, my degrees, the hours I'd spent behind law firm filing cabinets while raising Cass on my own. She paused at the window and looked out toward the clipped hedges and the small bird bath I'd cleaned earlier that week. "This place has great angles for photos," she said. "Not, 'It's lovely,' or 'You've made it feel like home.' Just angles. Like she was scouting locations, not visiting family." A few days later, boxes started arriving. Lanterns, ivory table runners, foam boards with stylized calligraphy lengths of faux eucalyptus. Cass called it efficient to store everything in my garage. I had to shift the boxes every morning just to reach the dryer. The labels read things like centerpieces, "Do not crush," and ceremony decor. Sorted. Without asking, Cass sent out invitations for the engagement gathering. He told relatives it would be at our place, gave out my address, and filled my weekend with calls and catering drop-offs I hadn't agreed to. I cleaned for days. I ironed cloth napkins I didn't remember owning. Maris walked the rooms as if plotting camera positions, commenting softly on the lighting in the den. "You don't have to go overboard," she said, then asked if I had matching flutes for the toast. After the guests left, I found muddy shoe prints on the hallway rug and glitter confetti ground into the floorboards. A week later, Cass was already at the dining table when I got home, papers spread out before him. Maris sat beside him tapping a pen. The budget was printed highlighted and neatly totaled. The venue alone would cost just under $10,000. The photographer's package was over $4,000. Catering added another $7,000. And next to each total, bold and unmissable, was one word, Mom. "I can help a little," I said carefully, "but I can't cover everything." Cass's jaw tightened. Maris offered him a soothing look, then turned to me. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime celebration," she said. "It would mean a lot if your contribution matched how much you love him." That night, I sat in bed and opened my banking app. The balance I'd worked years to build my cushion for a quiet retirement, maybe a small condo near the park, matched their wedding budget almost exactly. It was a Tuesday when I finally said something out loud. June and I sat across from each other in the break room, balancing mismatched Tupperware containers on our knees. She talked about her youngest learning to drive, then asked gently, the way only someone who knows your silences, how things were at home. I told her. Not everything. Just enough the engagement party I hadn't planned the budget, I hadn't approved the expectation that I would quietly fund a wedding I never agreed to host. She didn't interrupt, just nodded and listened. When I said, "I feel like if I say no, I'll be branded as ungrateful," my voice cracked in the middle. I swallowed hard and reached for my water. She reached for her phone and typed something on the screen, then slid it across the table. A name, a number, a therapist nearby who didn't require a referral. I didn't call right away, but I saved it. A week later, I sat across from Dr. Soren Hale in a softly lit office with sand-colored chairs and no clocks. I spoke in short bursts about the overtime hours, the holiday weekends I spent filing motions, while Cass sat at home with borrowed movies and boxed macaroni. I told him about the guilt I had learned to carry like a bag that had always been mine. I called Cass's demands reparations. I said he was trying to make up for something lost. Dr. Hale waited. Then he said, 3 things I'd never named before: financial abuse, emotional blackmail, and the belief that love means sacrifice without limit. He asked me when I last spent money on something just for myself, not groceries, not a bill, not a shared family expense. I couldn't remember. We talked about next steps, a separate account, a written budget, a long-term housing plan that didn't involve walking on eggshells. Then he asked, "What if you said no?" And he stayed angry. "What if you said no?" And he left. I didn't have an answer, but the questions stayed. That night I opened a new savings account and moved a portion of my emergency fund. Quietly, I began drafting a will not to disown, just to unautomatic what had never been earned. Cass wasn't entitled to my home by default, just because someone once said that's what mothers do. He didn't notice. He was too busy arguing with Maris about centerpiece colors while she scrolled through imported candles. From the hallway, I heard him say, "We should just go ahead and book it. She'll cover it eventually." The chair at the bank was stiff, designed to be sat in politely, not for long. Across the desk, the teller frowned at her monitor, tapping a few keys before glancing up at me. "There's a pending charge on your account," she said. "Just confirming you approved a deposit to Hacienda Willow Creek for the amount of $14,500. I blinked. "No," I said. "I didn't authorize that." She hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. My name appeared under the payer field. My address was correct. The box labeled signature held a crooked scrawl, familiar but wrong. It was my name, but not my hand. The loops were exaggerated. the pressure uneven. My throat tightened. "May I see the original file?" I asked. She printed the page. I stared at it for a long time before folding it carefully into my bag. That afternoon, I drove across town to the venue, an ivy-covered estate with white columns and overpriced charm. The coordinator greeted me with a wide smile and a clipboard. "You must be Elowen. We've been working with your son and his fiancée. He said you were thrilled to cover everything. I asked to see the contract." When I mentioned possible forgery, her smile faded. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard. "I'd like to place a hold on the agreement," I said calmly. "Nothing should be processed until this is resolved." That night, I stood just outside Cass's half-closed door. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words stopped me. "She must have gone to the venue," he said, voice sharp. "They're asking questions now. She always makes things more complicated than they need to be." Maris's voice came quieter but colder. "She won't take it that far. Parents don't turn on their kids. And once you're on the house deed, all of this is just semantics." My breath caught. I stepped back, heart thudding in my ribs. I hadn't known. They weren't just expecting money. They were planning ownership. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction. By morning, I was sitting in a real estate attorney's office, a stack of documents between us. I explained the situation. He nodded slowly, then showed me how to place my house into a living trust. The terms were simple: it remains mine until the day I die, and no one who coerces, defrauds, or pressures me receives a cent. When I walked out, the papers were tucked under my arm. It was the first time I'd built a legal wall between myself and my son. Sunday evening again. The same roast, the same mismatched napkins I'd been using since Cass was in high school. I kept the table simple. No candles, no wine glasses, just plates and water, and a tension so thick it clung to the corners of the room. Cass arrived 15 minutes late, Maris close behind. Both dressed too formally for a casual dinner, his shirt tucked in her earrings large enough to catch the overhead light. My stomach tightened. This wasn't dinner. It was a setup. We sat through 5 minutes of strained small talk. Cass asked how work was. Maris complimented the roast I hadn't yet served. I nodded, smiled, didn't mention the papers burning a hole in my purse. Then Cass reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a folder. He opened it like a lawyer presenting evidence, spreading pages across the table, color-coded charts, printed invoices, highlighted totals. The wedding budget? Updated. "Deposits have been placed," he said, tapping the sheet. "We just need you to confirm what you're covering." I kept my hands in my lap. "Who signed for the venue?" I asked. He blinked. "You must have. Or maybe we filled it out together. You always get these things mixed up." I didn't respond. I waited. "You're making everything complicated again." He snapped, his voice thinning. From the end of the table, Rhett's voice crackled from the phone Cass had propped against a glass. "Elle, you worked all those years for your family. What else is it?" For Maris stayed silent, but her face didn't shift. She expected this to happen. It wasn't a question to her, just a matter of logistics. "I can't drain my savings for a single event," I said. Cass pushed back from the table. The chair scraped across the floor. His face flushed red. "Pay for my wedding," he shouted. "It's your duty. Or disappear forever." The room held still. His voice echoed once, then dropped into silence. In that moment, I didn't see my son. I saw every expectation I had swallowed whole. Every rule I'd lived under that a mother should always give no matter what it costs her. I stood. Slowly, I tucked in my chair with steady hands. "You have 24 hours to leave my house." Cass opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. Rhett's voice broke into a sputter. Maris stared at me like I had cracked the script. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I left the table and the door clicked closed behind me as I stepped into the hallway. The hours after I told them to leave are jagged and strange. Cass storms down the hallway, his footsteps shaking the floorboards. He slams the bedroom door, opens it again, then starts calling relatives on speaker, loud enough for me to hear every word. He paints me as unstable, claims I've lost touch with reality, says I'm sabotaging the happiest moment of his life. Maris paces the hallway in tight loops, muttering about legal rights she clearly doesn't understand. I hear her mention tenancy and due process like she's quoting from a blog post. I don't argue. I don't correct them. I open my laptop at the kitchen counter, email. The attorney who handled the trust confirmed the legal standing of long-term guests without a lease. Then I schedule a locksmith for the following evening and begin gathering important documents, birth certificates, account records, spare keys into a small metal box. I set it beside my bedroom door. By morning, they're quieter, but no less persistent. Cass knocks, then walks in without waiting. He offers a compromise. I pay for the venue, the catering, the suit rental. They'll figure out the rest. I shake my head. You have until this evening, I say. His face changes. Something flickers behind the frustration, something closer to fear. At noon, they try again this time, staging a kind of tribunal in the living room. Maris is perched on the edge of the armchair. Cass paces. On a video call, my sister-in-law Joan scolds me for forgetting everything he went without growing up. Maris says they'll be humiliated if the wedding falls apart now. There's no plan B, she says softly. I listen. Then I list the facts. 3 years of free rent, my groceries, my car, my name forged on a contract for over $14,000. By late afternoon, nothing is packed, so I go into the kitchen and pick up the phone. I dial the non-emergency police line and begin explaining the situation clearly and calmly, loud enough to be heard. Cass's face drains of color. He doesn't wait for me to finish. He grabs a suitcase from the closet and starts shoving clothes inside. The rest is loud, bitter. Drawers slammed, boxes dropped. Maris mutters that no one's going to believe her anyway. Rhett calls again, voice raised, demanding I stop. I end the call without a word. At 9:23 p.m., they stand at the front door, bags in hand. Cass won't meet my eyes. Maris narrows hers and says, "This won't be forgotten." I open the door. They walk through it. I close it behind them. The lock slides into place with a soft, final click. The house is quiet. Too quiet. Too large. Too echoing. But for the first time in years, I know it's mine. The weeks after they left passed without ceremony. No door slams. No footsteps overhead. No half-shouted phone calls drifting through the walls. Just a slow, steady quiet that settled into the bones of the house. The bills dropped to half their size. Groceries lasted more than a few days. I reclaimed the guest room and moved my old desk under the window where the morning sun cut across the floor in a soft line. I made coffee without rushing. I even let it go cold sometimes and didn't mind. June came by on a Saturday with a tub of cut fruit and a bottle of ginger ale. She stepped into the hallway, looked around, and said, "It feels lighter in here, like the house can finally breathe." I nodded, though I hadn't quite let myself believe it yet. Some part of me still glanced at my phone each night, waiting for the next accusation, the next spin on what I'd done wrong. The call came just after 2 a.m, weeks later. Cass's name lit the screen. I stared at it. I could have let it go to voicemail, but I answered. His voice was hoarse, stripped bare of charm. "I know it's late," he said, then hesitated. I didn't know who else to call. He told me everything in fragments. Maris had ended the engagement. The venue kept part of the deposit. He was behind on rent in a studio apartment near the old train yard. Creditors were calling. His hours at work had been cut. "I messed everything up," he said quietly. "I know I did." The old reflex kicked up fast drive to him, offer the spare room, pull out a checkbook, and clear the wreckage. My hand tightened around the phone. Then I heard Dr. Hale's voice, as steady as ever. What if you say no, and he stays angry? What if you say no and he grows? I took a slow breath. I'm sorry, things are hard, I said. I can give you some information, places to call, numbers for debt counseling, community housing programs. Maybe reach out to your father, too. He said he'd always be there. Cass was quiet. Then came the shift. The hurt. So you're abandoning me now, when I finally ask for help? The call ended a few seconds later. No goodbye. I stayed in bed, eyes on the ceiling, his voice still echoing. But the boundary didn't move. 1 year passed quietly, as if the house had exhaled. Cass moved to another state and found steady work at a logistics company. The pay wasn't great, but it was regular, and the updates I received were sparse and carefully neutral short texts on holidays, the occasional forwarded photo from my sister-in-law. There were no more emergencies, no late-night phone calls, no new requests. Rhett's voice faded too. He called twice that year, both times distracted and rambling, mostly wanting to be heard, not answered. I didn't feel guilt when I hung up, just relief. My life began to fill again, slowly and only with what I chose. I started walking every morning before work. I rearranged the living room, moved the couch Maris used to drape herself across. I reupholstered a dining chair whose cushion had worn thin under Cass's weight. At my attorney's office, I updated my will. The house would go to a local organization that supports women leaving abusive homes, offering them shelter, legal aid, and a start. I created a modest fund for Cass, too locked behind quiet conditions. He would have to maintain documented independent support for several continuous years before he could access it. It wasn't punishment. It was clarity. In one of my final sessions with Dr. Hale, I described that dinner table moment without hesitation. No trembling, no apologies. He asked me what I believed I had lost that night. The illusion, I told him, that being a mother means never having limits. One evening, I hosted a small potluck for coworkers and neighbors. Laughter echoed in the hallway again. Someone brought bread still warm from the oven. Another brought folding chairs. They laid dishes on the same table where not long ago Cass had shouted about duty and Maris had watched me like a liability. This time, the voices were kind. No one asked for anything I hadn't offered. After the last guest left, I moved through the house room by room, turning off lights. In the dining room doorway, I paused. The echo of that old threat, disappear forever, was gone. What remained was only mine. The refrigerator hummed softly. Traffic passed outside. The quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. I locked the front door, turned off the lamp, and walked upstairs without rehearsing a single apology. My home, my savings, and my time were finally mine, held gently and without permission.